Hello, hello. Welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about literally everything diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging under the sun. I am Maureen or Mo Berkner-Boyd. I am a white woman with mid-length red hair. I'm wearing some black cat-eye glasses with thick frames and a red shirt. And I'm super, super excited to be joined by Shujat Ahmed. We met, I call it the dinner. We met at a conference right when we were actually launching Everyday Inclusion. And it was this private dinner event. And I think there were 4 of us at the table, Shujat, I can't even, and all the other tables, they were chatting and laughing. And we had this intense conversation that was thought-provoking. And I mean, I left and we call it the dinner for that. And so that was actually, I think every single conversation we've had since then kind of takes that same, where we go deep really fast. So Shujat, please introduce yourself and then let's dig in like we always do.
Well, thank you for the intro. And to give context, that dinner was of all the places in the heart of Vegas.
I know, right?
So while everyone, so just to have everyone picture what everyone else was doing, and we were having this kind of conversation. So thank you, Mo, for. And I, by the way, loved how you introduced, and from an inclusivity perspective, like calling out like the visual cues. I'm not trained with that, but I'll pick this up for future. Train myself how to introduce myself. So Shujat Ahmed, I work at, my day job is I'm at LinkedIn. I'm part of the people analytics team. With the last 4.5 years, our focus has been myth busting with executives and leaders on anything around talent. How can we make it more evidence driven? And as part of that day job, I've consulted with clients, like head of lines of businesses. But a passion for me joining this space was diversity, inclusion, and belonging, or DIBS, as we call it at LinkedIn. So I was also the people analytics consultant for DIBS as well. And then now more recently, I run our future work portfolio, which is everything around strategy and signals that can help us build a future that is flexible and equitable at the same time. And my night job has also been in DIBS as well. So I also have been a global co-chair for our Embrace ERG, so Employee Resource Group, which is focused on at the global context of what is belonging for underrepresented ethnicities, nationalities, races, cultures, and how do we get a global context in this discussion on DIBS that, for better or worse, in most corporations has been still very US-centric view of it. Yeah. And happy to be here. Always a great chat with Mo.
So I want to start first before we get into just, talking about data and analytics and future and all of that. Ramadan is about to start.
Yes.
So how can people be good allies to their Muslim coworkers during Ramadan?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So first of all, I'll say a couple of years back, I created this educational deck within LinkedIn that then went viral. And then we had people from outside of the company also asking for it. So I was then asked to just convert it into a blog post. So I posted that last night as well. And I share that every couple of years on education on what it is and what you could do. I think personally, for me, so I think there's 3 things. One, understanding that there's a lot of energy loss, and we understand energy even more having worked remotely in the pandemic, with this collaboration overload that all of us are in, with meetings and like Zoom fatigue and all of that. So I think understanding that, for me, for example, in the afternoon, I would minimize meetings just so that I can preserve that energy, because I may be starting very early in the morning as well, and just taking that time away. And it's not just time away because you're not eating during the day. It is also because you're preserving energy to be mindful, meditate during the night as well. And over the course of 30 days, you will have sleep deprived, food deprived, and the body, will just catches on as days go on, and it's a test. So having that space for people, understanding that, yes, minimize meetings, and then also understand that, if there's something that's on urgent, you can move it, because end of the day, it's good for the individual and for you as a team as well. So that's one. we're virtual right now, so there's not an issue of like eating in front of people, and that's for different people, it's different, like should you eat in front of them or not, but just generally, be inclusive of events, and also just educate. Don't be afraid to, educate yourself, and it's more from an education perspective, not preaching perspective, like hey, what this is, what does it mean, because it does impact 1/4 of the world population that is mostly in the talent space and the professional working space as well.
Yeah, great. I love it because in the app, one of the sections that is searched the most is around that. So, but we will make sure, I'm going to put the link to your post in the notes from our, and really, really appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so now for the topic at hand. What do you think has been missing in most companies' approach to DEIB?
So let me just set some context as well. Again, so I'm here. So I also coach a lot of DIB or DIBS teams outside of the company. It's a topic of passion, and work with some researchers as well on this. So this is again representing my view of like as of what I've seen, not necessarily a company view. I think there's we're in an interesting journey right now, and I'll just, if it's okay, I'll just walk through some of the history of it. So like pre-pandemic, there was a focus on diversity or DEIB, but it's still and still is for a lot of companies, it's part of a PR and a branding risk, right?
Yeah.
And that is for any purposeful movement you've seen, right, on sustainability, like anytime throughout the years. And well, that's where it started, but it was also so limited that hey, we will outsource it to a few people who will run programs, help us make look good, and then there'll be few numbers that we will try to meet. It was still a numbers game. It blended to an industry of program managers. And while program management is good, but it was an industry that, hey, we want to fix our view on DEIB. Let's get people who would put in programs, do some trainings, and then move on to another company, right? So it's a lot of activities, not necessarily impact. During the pandemic, as we see civic activation, people also, like workers also getting fed up of like, kill the BS, be more truthful on this, forced companies to even more committed and put out goals and accountability in there, which I think is now getting called out if you're not meeting. Right? A good example was if you saw on the Women History Month, the Twitter feed that was going on, right, on gender. And I think that is going to happen at the individual, at the group level, like people will call you out on that.
So hold on, Shujat. If folks didn't, if you didn't see this, there was on Twitter, it was fantastic. So companies were posting, right? They were doing the PR thing about break the bias and doing all the things. And then they were getting called out about their pay inequity. It was brilliant, right? It was absolutely brilliant. So it was like, people they're keeping receipts now. And so the PR approach isn't going to work anymore.
Exactly. So I would say, the narrative top down that was, hey, let's say break the bias. And then the people listening to it start calling it break the BS. Right. And so like, that's where it's like, I think that's where we are right now. It's a tipping point. And the reason for this, in my perspective, is that the why for DEIB hasn't been done clearly by those who are stewarding DEIB as well. Mm-hmm. So, if you look at, across companies, not just organizations, even politicians, no one wants to say the wrong thing, right? Yet we all understand that this is a journey and it happens. It's so personal as well that you have to sort of make mistakes in this, but there is no capacity to make mistakes. So that's one. And everyone knows what to say the right thing. But when you come to businesses, you have to ask yourself, right? Are you investing in something because it's the right thing to do? So yes, you should. But then you have to understand, like, what's the sphere of influence? What's the limits, right, to that? And then secondly, does it connect with what my purpose is as a business? And I think those who have gotten the second one right as well have become more powerful in doing this, because they're able to say, okay, here's my value chain. In this value chain, what I produce as a company, how can I create opportunity? right? And I'll do some of our like own self-marketing against like, LinkedIn, we've thought about equity on our platform, right? So if we impact so many professionals, can we build a platform in a way that drives that? Because that's, a good purpose we can drive. Another example I will say is, Starbucks as an example, like, or with Howard Schultz, as good or bad, I think Howard Schultz, some of the things that he did were very in your face. When the immigrant and refugee crisis was happening a couple of years back, and everyone was going out and making big statements, all they did, they said, hey, 10,000 jobs are going to be for the refugees. Right. And I know personally people who've called people in at Starbucks and realized the person working was actually a refugee, right? So it's like, how do you use your value chain? And you're not trying to solve for world hunger, but you can do what you can from your purpose. I think that's the tipping point where now it's leading to that third phase of, okay, we've gone from a industry of DIY that is focused on, at best, can create awareness, right? But when you think about, training anyone, there are three objectives of our training, three levels. At the basic level, when you're doing training or writing something, it's knowledge, right? So you're creating awareness. But then you would hope that that gets converted into some skills in order to make a difference. And then lastly, ability to actually use the skills and knowledge to make a difference. And I think that is where the tipping point is happening, where hey, this is not just about awareness. We are trying to drive behavioral change.
Yeah.
And you have to drive behavioral change in a way that it's not just punitive, so that, hey, if you make a mistake, right, you have to learn from this. So that space being created, and also measuring for behavior change as well.
Yeah.
There. And the last thing I'll throw is like, a good testament for this is, while everyone started the journey with the end goal in mind, saying, hey, we have to get the right representation in, which is very critical, right? But when you make your end goal the starting goal and not realize that, you're fighting a systemic bias, right? To do that, you have to figure out the drivers there. Yeah. And are the drivers for how managers behave, how individuals behave in a company, how are everything, like, when you start a meeting, are you inclusive of everyone in the way you open up the meeting, right? So those are behaviors that lead to eventually also supporting that numbers game as well, right? Yep. But right now, the focus is on numbers a lot and not understanding their drivers. The market is booming right now. Everyone is going to meet numbers. But when the market is not, will your executive leaders come and ask you that, hey, we were doing all these activities. How do you know what led to what? And when not doing that, you're losing credibility on this as an initiative as well.
Yeah, I think, and there has been this huge push for data. But let's talk about the reality of that. Because and I think this is from our very first conversation around data that I can't wait for this part of our conversation.
So when diversity globally started from a gender perspective, yep, right? Yep. But when it came to,
that was the safe thing to track.
That was a safe thing to track. It is also like a very common denominator that you see that the inequity across globally, no matter what culture, you look at history as well. But when it came to corporate America, or like this in North America, that's where it got a bit screwed up, right? Because here, when you come in legally, because there are certain buckets of people can self-ID, right, only. And then because there are certain buckets, as you're collecting that, the legal team and everyone jumps in, because, which rightfully so, because anything that could be misrepresented, right, could be misused as an insight, wrong insight, and next thing you know, it's a PR and ER campaign. Mm-hmm. And so it became a liability as well, right? So first of all, like the data collection of like who identifies with what, yeah, because of limited buckets, got forced into one identity parameter. So either you're a certain ethnicity, and those are even very strongly dictated of like what you can collect, right? With that, again, you're talking about minorities, right? So when you look at data, the data is going to be small as well. So, and you're trying to solve, everyone tries to put big data logic to a problem that is a small data problem, right? So that's one. So one is the data collection identification is limited legally, and then it's easy for people to say, hey, let's just step back. This is the only thing we can collect. So that's, I think, wrong. So that's,
well, and it's only collecting for the D.
it's exact. It's only collecting for the D, exactly. And then you measure inclusion and belonging as well, or equity as well. I know that you're like, hey, but great, but I want to see what's the difference on only for the few D categories that I can measure. And while they serve their purpose, I think we have to realize that the whole movement is to change the system, but to starting off with the data is limited by the same system that dictated what data you can get. So you have to rethink, rewire frameworks. So as an example, if I go in and try to figure out, hey, what are all the different nationalities in the US? You can't ask them. No legal team will let you ask them, right? But I think where we have to get right is like, hey, what's the purpose? The purpose is directionally seeing what are people's interests. So there's creative ways of you asking it without someone sharing their identity, right? It is, hey, here are different causes or cultural events or cultural traditions that mean belonging for you. So you can be creative in asking that, hey, what relates, or which one would you want to be celebrated?
Yes.
And keeping it, keeping the anonymity there, you now have a good idea directionally of what you need to design for, right? So there's ways there. Then secondly, on the data itself, right? You rightfully said, we don't look at inclusion and belonging, right? So for example, Professor Stephanie Carey, like you admire her, she's done some great work, and it aligns with my own perspective as well, that, it's diverse teams that win. And what, everyone starts linking, hey, let's link it with the stock price. The stock price is such a volatile, full of noise. You want to see that there's a team, and there's a team serves a certain purpose. What's the objective of that team? So for example, a board has a certain objective. There's a certain performance metrics for a board. You've put a diverse board together, but the decision rights are with one or two people. Right? That applies to every possible unit of team, right? So in a team, you put diversity in, but is it inclusive?
Right.
You belonging, and then the diversity of thought comes in as well. Like, are we covering every possible parameter here? That helps us become better in our decision making. Helps us become better in how we view the world. So I think that's where starting off, everyone assumes that data is just abundant and we can go. It is limited in what you collect. So you have to change that. If you can't change that because it's a policy change, you can be creative, and you're not trying to get to every individual, you're trying to get to directionally what are the aspects you can cover, and then improve from there. Yeah. But in there, then get from diversity, you have to get to inclusion and belonging, but to drivers of inclusion and belonging, right? You just asked me about Ramadan, right? Belonging for me could be going into a LinkedIn cafe and seeing in the menu that, hey, for the smallest possible population in the US, in the workforce, hey, we serve halal meat. That's belonging for me. So that's a moment of belonging, right? For someone else, it could be 10 events. For someone, it could be, very hard conversation that happens ongoing in their team. So what are the drivers for belonging? Yeah. What are the drivers for inclusion? So, because then you can come back and say, hey, are these drivers happening? Because if they're happening, even if you're not moving on the numbers, because there's a limited talent pool, for example, you are changing the culture, right? So.
And you and I have had this conversation about that it's really about microcultures, right? That it's about the microcultures on teams, and that there can be a wide and wild variety, right? Where you might have in one business unit and the teams within that business unit, right? There's one leader that they're creating on that team, this environment where it's those everyday little things, right? That that I bring up to the folks in the cafeteria that we actually need to, because I've had a conversation with you, right? And I understand with you, and we're making space in meetings for X, Y, and Z, like all of these things. So if I said, what's LinkedIn's culture? You couldn't really tell me that, right? You could tell me about a whole bunch of microcultures. And I think that's even talking about big data, what so much of this is bottom up organic at these team microculture, and how are you getting that? And sometimes it's not even hard data, right? But for that leader to be having those interactions and finding out, right? How is my team feeling? What are we doing? What do we need to change? That there's this inverse relationship between how far up I am in the food chain and my impact on daily and inclusive culture.
I love that, because and I think it's both. You play at both levels, right? So for example, when I said it started off as it's become a business, right? And I know that as well, because when I coach other teams, I know I can easily go become a consultant and charge for it, but I was like, but to what? To what end result? Like what's the purpose? And again, great work done by DIPS consultants as well, and this industry, they're doing great work. I think it's for companies to understand, hey, what's the end purpose? So you can do a lot of employee resource groups, right? And I talk to other employee resource groups and other companies as well. When we built ours as well, we were very, very specific that, hey, we're not going to start off as just a social employee resource group, because you can go and attend a happy hour, and the purpose for social is good. It's for building a community for people who you can connect with and share with. But now when you want to go into, hey, I want growth, I want fair, I want inclusion and belonging beyond this in my career as well, because at the end of the day, I'm working here for a certain value prop. That you can go have a social hour, happy hour, and you come back, you may be the one and only person in that team, right? So now that is where this becomes really powerful. And I say this, but it gets misused as well. It's like, hey, managers, whether for the future of work, whether for like anything on making a great workplace, are the single point of success or failure. That doesn't mean that managers should be the only ones, like, punitive in a punitive way. It is helping them understand that you are the curator of the experience in a team that will, fuel inclusion and belonging.
Yep.
And you're also the curator that there's going to be good and bad in here. There's going to be misses. And you create that environment of psychological safety.
Right.
But first, you have to create psychological safety for the manager as well, that they are able to create this.
Yes.
And it is at the team level. So the micro and macro, right? So, when the pandemic started, everyone's scrambling, figuring out, like, what do we do? The economy was in a dip as well in the first couple of months. And culture could be many things, but it'll also be how your leader comes up as human and honest in what they explain to the company. And you're like, that moment defines culture. And that's the same thing with teams as well, that, when George Floyd happened, you're in a pandemic, are you continuing to just have business discussions, or you're saying, shift the agenda?
Yep.
Hey, I don't know how to have this chat, but I want to have this chat with the team around what does it mean for people, give them that space.
Yeah.
It's definitely micro. And again, as we think about the future, we're already living the future. This was already known. It's just, I think the pandemic catalyzed it. Is we are, two things. So two visions, and I see that completely happening now more and more. One, the workplace is a platform for building purposeful lives, not just resumes. So
Stop. Say that again. Okay. Say that again.
Okay. So the workplace is a platform for building purposeful lives, not just resumes. So that is what
this is our life experience.
Exactly.
It is our life experience. Right? Yeah, I was asked this, I was speaking and a woman said, how do you handle work-life balance? I said, it's life.
Exactly. It's life. And so now, like in that platform, right? And now with remote work and flexible, it's become even more available, because people are like, okay, what's my value prop? Why do I join this platform? I joined this platform, for some, it could be just monetary. For some, it could be monetary and some other intrinsic factors as well. For some, it's an area for me to create impact. That's the value prop that you're getting, right? From that workplace. And that happens then. The second part that's very closely that enables it is that, okay, are we talking about people being mercenaries? Well, if people who are only coming in for a certain aspect and that doesn't align for the culture you want, then you are hiring mercenaries.
Mhm.
But if you're also bringing in people who are thinking about culture and everything, and they deliver work for you, but also align with how the work happens, you now have missionaries for you, right? And that gets enabled now that the future org models, these are already the present models, is we operate in teams. Like teams get together, there's not a lot of hierarchy, and teams solve. And we've seen in this digital outburst right now in the pandemic, right, that everyone's realizing that why is collaboration difficult? Because listen, you have to break these barriers. We actually worked across different teams.
Wow.
And that's why team is the core, and the definition of team will move around. It doesn't have to be just your functional manager. It's a team leader. Right? If you are responsible for if you understand that bringing people together to help a purpose, whatever your end goal is for that project, you will get that on an ongoing basis and repeatable basis. You will have followership for people to come and work for your team and hence your company if you gave them everything, because you now are a platform for them, and not just the work itself.
So I knew this every conversation we've gone through about half of what we wanted. We're gonna have to have a part two. Who do you think is gonna get this right? I think you just answered that question, right? Like sort of, what do you see as the future and who's gonna get this right? Right? It's leaders that are embracing that.
I think it's leaders and organizations that are so I think the war on talent, if you just say, right, so this is even pre-pandemic as well. I was working on this, and the perspective even then was the war on talent. It's not about remote. It's not about just the war on talent is about flexibility, and the flexibility because it enables people to leverage that platform really well. Mm-hmm. So right now, if people are working remote, right, the value prop, they're like, hey, you're offering me this, the same company could be offering me this. I could sit on a laptop and do the same thing. What else is that connective tissue for me with what your purpose is? And I think those who get it right is getting down at that team level and understanding that I'll spend a few time on this. When we start with diversity, just the D, I think how you make it really powerful is to say, hey, we're going to solve for inclusion and belonging, but use our focus or our pilot case to be the minority underrepresented groups. Because if we can build this and it works for them, it will work for everyone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you design that and at the team level, right, what is happening at the team level, I think that will require people to think about flexibility in a very different way. It is decentralized. So we talk about blockchain and Web 3.0. It's decentralized organization with a centralized protocol and everything, but still decentralized, a collection of microcultures that have a unified identity, right? You ask anyone, they're like, hey, they're in a big company and they move to a startup. Why? They're like, well, the culture was changing. But like, that's because I'm an anti-scale person. Like at a certain point beyond scale, protocols break. But as long as the protocols serve the mini cultures and if the protocols are flexible, you will have an ongoing self-governing developing organization, not just an efficient organization.
Okay. I want you to leave me with one last truth bomb. And seriously, Shujat, we're going to do this again.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I think this should be like our annual, like what are we thinking? What are we thinking this? Yeah. So what is your last truth bomb about future DEIB, culture, people, data? That's a big truth bomb.
I believe, I think going with the same theme, I think it is, if everything that you measure, so not just DEIB, everything you measure is about teams and what leads a team to be a high performing team,
Mm.
and then take DIB in that lens and understand the drivers for it, you will get to you'll have to get to the why really easily, because you can say, hey, here's a team that gets together and here's a product features they've always come back with. So we know the output. What led to it? Was it diversity of thought? How the decisions were made? Inclusion, belonging? Who got the opportunities in there, right? And why not? And now put that team was distributed as well, somewhere in the office. So I think understanding that if you take teams, and you don't have to go do it for the entire organization, pick few bright spots and pick few hot spots, and dive deeper in them and use them to say, all right, let's socialize the playbook. Right. So I think that is key. You will get big data, small data, research. You will get truths that you had no idea about at that level. I think that's the key, and that's what will define who gets it right.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Thank you. Always appreciate your thinking, your kind of pushing against what people believe to be true. As you said, you're a myth buster. And I love that. And myth busting, right, means getting down into those details and figuring it out. So keep doing the work. I really appreciate everything that you're creating in the world, and the impact that you're having, and can't wait to continue this conversation. To those of you that are a part of the Everyday Inclusion and Belonging community, keep doing the work. Keep showing up, learning, take one thing. And as we always say, do the next right thing.
Thank you, Mo, for all of that. Thank you for the kind words. And I think it goes back to you yourself. This is a platform, right? This is a platform for educating people and getting to more purposeful lives and getting the activists for the purposeful life. So thank you again for everything that you do.
Cheers. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.